This mono-white Angel tribal build attempts to gain victory through evasive beatdown combat. In addition to distributing +1/+1 counters onto our Angels when they enter the battlefield, our commander helps to cast Angel creature spells ahead of curve through her activated ability. When coupled with various Angel creature token producing spells and abilities, our plentiful and powerful chorus of Angels will deliver us victory after victory. Giada, Font of Hope, debuted in Streets of New Capenna and is a 2/2 angel with flying and vigilance for 1/1 white mana. Each other angel we control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each angel we already control. Each angel we already control means each angel we control other than the angel entering the battlefield, which includes Giada. We also can tap Giada to add a white mana to our mana pool, but we can only spend this mana to cast an angel spell. Giada is the most powerful angel tribal leader in Magic. Her mana cost is very affordable based upon the abilities she possesses. Her presence on the battlefield allows us to cast our angel spells ahead of curve, and Giada also boosts their power and toughness through her +1/+1 counter delivery system, and all for just 2 mana. Through this dynamic, we are putting creatures into play before their intended mana curves, and each angel that enters our side of the battlefield gets bigger and bigger each time because of Giada. Wizards finally sent us the angel to love, and it's Giada. Crafting a land base for a monocolored build allows us to not preoccupy ourselves with mana fixing, while opening the door to a wider range of utility options. Even with Giada providing a white mana to help cast our angels, angels are not cheap, and they shouldn't be either. For the purposes of this build and this theme, we want our lands to produce white mana, as well as provide any peripheral forms of resource development. With these guidelines in mind, let's begin with resource development. Path of Ancestry comes into play tapped. We can tap it to add 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, which is white, of course. If we spend this mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. Scrying 1 here and there helps to manipulate the top of our library for the purposes of getting angel spells or angel token producing spells into our hand. For some card drawing abilities, we can pay 3 mana, tap War Room, and pay life equal to the number of colors in our commander's color identity, which is 1 life, of course, in order to draw a card. We also can pay 3 mana and tap Bonder's Enclave to draw a card, but we can only activate this ability if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, which should never be a problem in an Angel tribal build. Whenever Seraph Sanctuary enters the battlefield, we gain 1 life. Whenever an angel enters the battlefield under our control, we also gain 1 life. This peripheral life gain will become more and more important as this deck tech unfolds. Iganjo, Seat of the Empire, comes into play untapped. Kudos to Wizards for making that possible. Through its channel ability, we can pay 2 and a white mana and discard this card from our hand to deal 4 points of damage to target attacking or blocking creature. And this ability costs 1 generic mana less to activate for each legendary creature we control. We have a lot of legendary angels in this build, so paying a reduced channel cost is very possible here. Emeria, the Sky Ruin, enters the battlefield tapped and taps to add 1 white mana to our mana pool. At the beginning of our upkeep, if we control at least 7 planes, then we may return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. It is reasonable to think that some of our angels will fall during the course of the game. As long as we have at least 7 planes on our side of the battlefield, which should be a feat as easy as Sunday morning, then Emeria's presence on the battlefield brings 1 angel back from our graveyard to the battlefield at the beginning of each of our upkeeps. For the purposes of accelerating our mana, we can pay 2 generic mana and tap and sacrifice Myriad Landscape to search our library for 2 basic land cards that share a land type and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Urza's Saga can accelerate our mana base as well. When the first lore counter is placed onto this enchantment land, we can tap it to add a colorless mana. The second lore counter allows us the option of paying 2 generic mana and tapping it to create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token that gets +1/+1 for each artifact we control. When the third and final lore counter is placed onto it, we sacrifice Urza's Saga and we search our library for an artifact card with a mana cost of 0 or 1 and put it onto the battlefield. Although our searchable options are limited, the end result will help to accelerate our mana. When paired alongside Giada, we can cast our angel spells even earlier than their mana curve intended. This brings us to the bulk of our land base. Since we're playing mono-white, all signs point to Plains being the most featured land in our build. But it's not. Instead of playing with plains, we are going to play with snow-covered plains instead. This allows for a more strategic constructing of an accelerated mana base, which is perfect when considering the hefty and expensive costs of maintaining angels. How are we going to do this? When extraplanar lens comes into play, we exile target land we control. Whenever a land with the same name as the exile card is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of any type that land produced. In any mono-colored deck, extraplanar lens can provide a massive boost in mana resources if utilized in this strategic way. It is far less likely that any of our opponents with white in their EDH decks are playing with snow-covered plains instead of plains. This way, we restrict the double mana producing lands to only snow-covered plains, of which we have a plethora, and our opponents, most likely, will have none. There are 30 snow-covered plains in this deck. We also have the usual suspect secondary to Mana Rock representation with Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, and Arcane Signet. Mana Crypt and Soul Ring tap to add 2 colorless mana, while Arcane Signet taps to add a white mana in this build. Note that Mana Crypt has a coin-flipping upkeep trigger that deals 3 points of damage to us if we lose the flip. Casting any of these Mana Rocks alongside Giada early in the game should yield very favorable results, secondary to adding members to our Chorus of Angels. Completing the Mana Rock portion of this deck tech are Mind Stone and Thought Vessel. Each costs 2 generic mana to cast, and tap to add 1 colorless mana to our mana pool. We can pay a generic mana and tap and sacrifice Mind Stone to draw a card, while Thought Vessel gives us no maximum hand size. It may not appear necessary to include a no maximum hand size effect in a mono-white build, but as we will demonstrate, this deck has a surprisingly high number of card advantage effects. Speaking of card advantage effects, when Herald's Horn enters the battlefield, we choose Angels. Angel spells we cast cost 1 generic mana less to cast. Also, at the beginning of our upkeep, we look at the top card of our library. If it's an angel creature card, we may reveal it and put it into our hand. The mana cost reduction equates to having another Giada-like mana ability on our side of the battlefield, and with a 1 in 3 chance of drawing an extra card at the beginning of our upkeep, Herald's Horn is an artifact that keeps on giving. Folk Hero gives commander creatures we own, whenever we cast a spell that shares a creature type with this creature, we draw a card. Although this ability triggers only once each turn, we can still consider this background a reliable source of card advantage. We can say the same about Endless Atlas. We can pay 2 generic mana and tap this artifact to draw a card, but we can only activate this ability if we control at least 3 lands with the same name. Remember, we have 30 snow-covered plains in this build. We should be able to activate Endless Atlas without any concerns. Chivalric Alliance draws us a card whenever we attack with at least 2 creatures. Our angels are not on the battlefield to act as spectators. We should be able to trigger this enchantment's card-drawing ability every turn. If needed, we can pay 2 generic mana and discard a card to create a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with Vigilance. This feature easily helps to add to our board state. Overcoming the Vorthos in you to create knight creature tokens in a dedicated angel tribal build may not be as easy. Whenever we gain life, Well of Lost Dreams allows us to pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life gained. If we do, then we draw X cards. There is a life gain sub-theme woven into this build, and Well of Lost Dreams is a powerful way to reap peripheral benefits from it. The color white is host to an inordinate amount of powerful removal spells and effects, and this feature is well represented in this deck. Beginning with spot removal, we have the best of the best in Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. These instants cost 1 white mana and exile target creature. The exiled creature's controller respectively gains life equal to the exiled creature's power, or searches their library for a basic land and puts it into play tapped. Next up is Generous Gift. It destroys target permanent, and its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Return to Dust exiles target artifact or enchantment, but if we cast this spell during our main phase, then we exile another target artifact or enchantment as well. Moving to mass removal spells, we have Doomscar. We can pay 3 and 2 white mana to destroy all creatures, or we can foretell this card. To foretell this card, during our turn, we pay 2 generic mana and exile it from our hand face down. We can cast it on a later turn for its foretell cost. Doomscar's foretell cost is 1 and 2 white mana. In the early game, this allows us access to a board sweeper through its foretell mechanic, and in the late game, it provides a mass removal option if needed. As mass removal options go, Austere Command provides it in spades. We can choose 2 of the following 4 modes: destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with mana value 3 or less, and or destroy all creatures with mana value 4 or greater. A certain yet-to-be-showcased angel synergizes wonderfully with these mass removal spells. We can pay 1 and 1 white mana to have Winds of Abandon exile target creature we don't control. Or we can pay its overload cost of 4 and 2 white mana and exile each creature we don't control. For each creature exiled this way, its controller searches their library for a basic land card, and those players put those cards onto the battlefield tapped. Providing our opponents with oodles of free basic lands is not optimal, but the trade-off is reasonable when we consider that our creatures remain on the battlefield while our opponent's creatures are exiled. Aside from returning commanders to their respective command zones, returning creatures from exile is a feat that's as rare as winter roses. As for Mass Calcify, it simply destroys all non-white creatures, which, of course, tips the battlefield in our favor since we are playing a mono-white angel deck. Lightmine Field is an oft-forgotten and seldom used source of creature removal, but in the right type of build, it could be absolutely devastating. Whenever 1 or more creatures attack, Lightmine Field deals damage to each of those creatures equal to the number of attacking creatures. Yes, this enchantment is triggered whenever we attack as well, but the vast majority of our angels have robust toughnesses, which also are boosted by Giada's +1/+1 counter delivery system. Our angels will not be impacted at all by Lightmine Field. I am not so sure that our opponents will say the same, particularly for any opponents playing creature token or tribal builds. With our land base, ramp, card advantage, and battlefield management portions of the deck showcased, we can now turn our attention to our angels. With well over 100 angels from which to choose, we made our selections based on versatility and impact in combat. We begin with some removal options. When Angel of Finality enters the battlefield, we exile target player's graveyard. When Angel of the Ruins comes into play, we exile up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. It also has Plane Cycling 2, which means we can pay 2 generic mana and discard this card to search our library for a Plains card and put it into our hand. Branching out from graveyard, artifact, and enchantment exile, we have Sunblast Angel. When it comes into play, we destroy all tapped creatures. Note that if any of our creatures are tapped, then they will be destroyed as well. Angel of the Dire Hour has Flash, and when she enters the battlefield, as long as we cast her from our hand, then we exile all attacking creatures. This effect can devastate an opponent. When Angel of Serenity comes into play, we exile up to 3 other target creatures from the battlefield and/or creature cards from graveyards. When she leaves play, we return the exile cards to their owner's hands. Versatility reigns supreme with Angel of Serenity, as her Enter the Battlefield trigger can be utilized to eventually return angels to our hand, temporarily exile our opponent's creatures from the battlefield or their graveyards, or some combination of each. Continuing our trend with angels that interact with our opponents is Angelic Arbiter. Each opponent who cast a spell this turn cannot attack with creatures, and each opponent who attacked with a creature this turn cannot cast spells. The Arbiter strips down gameplay options for our opponents to either spell casting or attacking with creatures during each of their turns. Our opponents will have a difficult time trying to keep up with this deck when they can only participate in the game through these restrictions. Linvala, Keeper of Silence, and Sarah's Emissary can be even more impactful. Linvala shuts down the activated abilities of creatures our opponents control, while Sarah's Emissary has us choose a card type when she enters the battlefield. We and creatures we control have protection from the chosen card type. More often than not, we are going to choose creatures. Gaining protection from creatures makes combat even easier for us and impossible for our opponents. Speaking of combat, let's showcase some angels that impact it. If Archangel of Tithes is untapped, then creatures cannot attack us or a planeswalker we control unless their controller pays 1 generic mana for each of those creatures. Also, as long as Archangel of Tithes is attacking, creatures cannot block unless their controller pays 1 generic mana for each of those creatures. These taxes make it difficult for our opponents to advance their board state and attack us in the same turn. Whenever Herald of War attacks, we'd put a +1/+1 counter on it. Angel spells and human spells we cast cost 1 generic mana less to cast for each +1/+1 counter on Herald of War. Note that this mana reduction counts for all the +1/+1 counters on Herald of War, including the counters put onto her by Giada's ability. Windshaper Planetar has Flash and provides a one-time impact on combat. When it comes into play during the Declare Attacker step of combat, for each attacking creature, we may reselect which player or permanent that creature is attacking. This effect can deny an opponent the option of attacking us for a turn, while pointing those same creatures in other directions. At the beginning of each combat, Angelic Skirmisher allows us to choose First Strike, Vigilance, or Lifelink, and creatures we control gain this ability until end of turn. More often than not, we are choosing First Strike during combat on an opponent's turn and Vigilance during combat on our turn. Through this dynamic, we always have angels able to attack and defend during a round of turns. Sigarda's Vanguard has Flash, and whenever she enters the battlefield or attacks, we choose any number of creatures with different powers. Those creatures gain Double Strike until end of turn. Note that when she comes into play, we can choose our opponent's creatures for this temporary Double Strike enablement, which could result in multiple creatures perishing during opponent-on-opponent combat. Now let's turn our attention to some angels that provide us with peripheral resources. Whenever another angel or cleric comes into play under our control, Righteous Valkyrie has us gain life equal to that creature's toughness. As long as we have at least 7 or more life than our starting life total, creatures we control get +2/+2. Righteous Valkyrie is a part of our aforementioned life gain sub-theme, and activating her double anthem effect should be easier than Sunday morning in this build. Speaking of life gain, at the beginning of each end step, Valkyrie Harbinger and Resplendent Angel create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance if we respectively gained at least 4 or 5 life this turn. The Valkyrie is a 4/5 with lifelink, and we can pay 3 and 3 white mana to activate the Resplendent One's ability to get +2/+2 and gain lifelink until end of turn. These angels easily could trigger their own abilities when sent into combat, or while defending against our opponents. When Linvala the Preserver enters the battlefield, if an opponent has more life than we do, then we gain 5 life. And if an opponent controls more creatures than we do, then we create a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying. Speaking of creature tokens with flying, whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, Emeria Angel allows us the option of creating a 1/1 white bird. Emiria Shepherd's landfall ability is even more impactful. Whenever a land comes into play under our control, we may return target non-land permanent card from our graveyard to our hand, but if that land is a plains, then we may return that non-land permanent card to the battlefield instead. Imagine how demoralized our opponents will feel when we return an angel from our graveyard to the battlefield simply by playing a land. Karmic Guide does the same whenever she comes into play. She also has an echo cost of 3 and 2 white mana, which means that at the beginning of our upkeep, if Karmic Guide came under our control since the beginning of our last upkeep, we sacrifice it unless we pay its echo cost. Note that this card's creature type shifted from Spirit to Angel Spirit upon its reprinting in the Commander 2013 product. Continuing with our resource-producing angels is Sanctuary Warden. She enters the battlefield with 2 shield counters on her. If a permanent with 1 or more shield counters on it is dealt damage, then that damage is prevented and a shield counter is removed. Whenever Sanctuary Warden comes into play or attacks, we may remove a counter from a creature or a planeswalker we control. If we do, then we draw a card and we create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. Note that we can remove counters this way from any creature we control, which includes creatures with +1/+1 counters placed onto them by Giada's ability. When it comes to angels producing resources, none may be better than Battle Angels of Tyr. With its myriad ability, whenever it attacks, for each opponent other than defending player, we may create a token that's a copy of it that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. These tokens are then exiled at the end of combat. Whenever Battle Angels of Tyr deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card if that player has more cards in hand than each other player, we create a treasure token if that player has more lands than each other player, and we gain 3 life if that player has more life than each other player. Although this build confidently shows a penchant for drawing cards, accelerating mana, and gaining life, there is always the possibility that our opponents may be stronger than us in one of these areas. Battle Angels of Tyr helps to close that gap in a hurry. We have showcased a plethora of angels with versatile utility benefits attached to them. Now let's close out the angel creature spell portion of this deck tech with some stalwart combat options. Lyra Dawnbringer is a 5/5 with flying, first strike, and lifelink, and she gives other angels we control +1/+1 and lifelink. Prior to Giada's release, Lyra was the go-to mono-white angel commander. At the time of this video's creation, despite being released more than 4 years after Lyra, Giada has been registered as a commander at EDH Rec nearly 10 times more than Lyra. She may no longer have a place in the command zone, but she is a very formidable threat coming out of the 99. Bruna, the Fading Light, and Gisela, the Broken Blade, are respectful inclusions in an Angel Tribal build. Bruna is a 5/7 with flying and vigilance, and when we cast her, we may return target angel or human card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Note that entering the battlefield does not trigger Bruna's ability. It is a cast trigger. Gisela is a 4/3 with flying, first strike, and lifelink for only 2 and 2 white mana. On their own, they have standalone value. However, at the beginning of our end step, if we both own and control Bruna and Gisela, then we exile them and meld them into Brisella, Voice of Nightmares, a 9/10 Eldrazi angel with flying, first strike, vigilance, and lifelink. Our opponents cannot cast spells with mana value 3 or less. A horrific end for 2 popular angels from Avacyn Restored is an overpowered nightmare for our opponents. Speaking of nightmares for our opponents, Akroma, Angel of Wrath, is a 6/6 with flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, protection from black, and protection from red. The bane of Rakdos players everywhere, Akroma may be the single most powerful combat option in the Angel tribe. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Avacyn, Angel of Hope. She is an 8/8 with flying, vigilance, and indestructible, and she gives other permanents we control indestructible as well. Avacyn may be the single most powerful defensive option in the Angel tribe. She protects our entire board, making any of the aforementioned Wrath spells even more impactful. She can attack and defend every turn due to her vigilance and indestructibility. Akroma and Avacyn are extraordinarily impactful and are the 2 most powerful angels in all of Magic. Now let's close out this deck tech with a smattering of cards that synergize with and enhance this Angel tribal build. Our opponents will attempt to remove our Angels from the battlefield at all costs. With this in mind, we would be remiss if we failed to include some layers of additional protection outside of Avacyn's indestructible enablement. Dawn Charm regenerates target creature, prevents all combat damage that will be dealt this turn, or counters target spell that targets us. The three modes of this charm are very relevant here, as they offer varying degrees of protection. Another option is, and they shall know no fear. We can give Angels we control +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. Eerie Interlude has us exile any number of target creatures we control. We return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, which provides us some temporary protection. Teferi's protection takes it a few steps further. It phases out all permanents we control, and until our next turn, our life total cannot change, and we gain protection from everything. Here we can preserve our entire board and our life total until our next turn. For getting our Angels into play without casting them, we can pay 4 generic mana and tap Quicksilver Amulet to cheat an Angel into play from our hand. We also can pay X and 3 white mana and cast Ascend from Avernus to return all creature and planeswalker cards with mana value X or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. We then exile Ascend from Avernus upon resolution. Let's be sure to include some Angel token producing spells and effects for the purposes of supplementing our Angel creature spells. We can pay 2 and 2 white mana and cast Starnheim Unleashed to create a 4/4 white Angel creature token with flying and vigilance. Or we can pay 2 generic mana and exile this card from our hand face down, and then cast it on a later turn for its foretell cost of 2x and 1 white mana. If we choose to do so, then we create X 4/4 white Angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance instead. We can pay 2x and triple white mana and cast Entreat the Angels to create X 4/4 white Angel creature tokens with flying. Or, if we are lucky, we could cast this spell for its miracle cost instead. We may cast it for X and 2 white mana when we draw it, if it is the first card we drew this turn. Note that we can reveal and cast a card with miracle on any turn, and not just our own. Timing restrictions do not apply. By foretelling Starnheim Unleashed and casting Entreat the Angels for its miracle cost, we maximize the return on our mana investment by creating more Angels, much to the dismay of our opponents. Continuing with our Angel token producing cards is Court of Grace. When this enchantment enters the battlefield, we become the Monarch. At the beginning of our upkeep, we create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. If we are the Monarch, then we create a 4/4 white Angel creature token with flying instead. We hold on to the Monarch until a creature deals combat damage to us, and then that creature's controller becomes the Monarch. At the beginning of the Monarch's end step, that player draws a card. We have the defensive capability to hold the Monarch throughout the game, which allows us to reap the benefits of its end step card draw and upkeep Angel creature token triggers. Parhelion II is a legendary vehicle with Crew 4, which means that if we tap any number of creatures with power 4 or more, then this vehicle becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. It should only take 1 Angel to crew the Parhelion, and whenever it attacks, we create 2 4/4 white Angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance that are attacking. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if we did not lose life this turn, then we may put a quest counter on Luminarch Ascension. If Luminarch Ascension has at least 4 quest counters on it, then we may pay 1 and 1 white mana to create a 4/4 Angel creature token with flying. Note that we can activate this ability multiple times in a turn, and as long as we have at least 4 quest counters on it, we should plan to do so. If left unchecked, these Angel token producing cards can get out of hand very, very quickly and inundate our side of the battlefield with Angels. Bishop of Wings is not an Angel, and it does not create Angel creature tokens. It does, however, synergize with our Angel tribe beautifully. Whenever an Angel comes into play under our control, we gain 4 life. And whenever an Angel we control dies, we create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. We already have demonstrated various peripheral benefits of gaining life in this build, and if our angels fall, then Bishop of Wings replaces them with flying spirits. It is also a human cleric, and there are some human and cleric synergies present in this build. All of these attributes make Bishop of Wings a worthy addition to this Angel deck. Bringing this deck tech to a close are our last two cards, Angel's Grace and Akroma's Will. Angel's Grace is an instant that has split second, which means that as long as it is on the stack, players cannot cast spells or activate abilities that are not mana abilities. When we cast Angel's Grace, we cannot lose the game this turn, and our opponents cannot win the game this turn either. Until end of turn, any damage that would reduce our life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. The split-second ability on this card prevents it from being countered, which, in most instances, gives us another chance to win the game. Speaking of winning the game, Akroma's Will allows us to choose one of the following. Either creatures we control gain Flying, Vigilance, and Double Strike until end of turn, or they gain Lifelink, Indestructible, and Protection from all colors until end of turn instead. If we control Giada when we cast this spell, then creatures we control gain Flying, Vigilance, Double Strike, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Protection from all colors until end of turn. The game should end soon after. Hopefully, our time playing games of Magic with our opponents will not. This Giada Font of Hope build has been added to the Burgeoning Commander Catalog, and this video also becomes the starting point of a Giada Font of Hope EDH deck video primer series. These playlist series can be accessed in the description below, on our YouTube page, or at the end of this video. The Burgeoning Commander Catalog is my personal collection of EDH decks. An EDH deck video primer series showcases the continued evolution of a deck through future appearances on the Up and Up series, during which we update and upgrade decks featured on this channel. The full card list for this build can be found in the description, and be sure to share your thoughts about this Giada Font of Hope deck in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.